Maybe we can just get started doing a few quick intros. You want to tell folks who you are?
Sure. I'm Dr. Tiffany Jana, also known as Doc Jana at this point. My pronouns are they, them, hence the Doc Jana. Tiffany's a very gendered name, even though I love it and will be indexed as an author that way forever. I have been an author in this equity and inclusion space since 2016. And Michael is my, of course, favorite co-author. Hello. But TMI Consulting is the 20-year-old diversity consulting firm that I have been running. And I'm headquartered in Richmond, Virginia, but we work all over the country and all over the world, doing full scale, full service equity. And we also have the scaled back turnkey digital accessible options as well. But absolutely an honor to be here with my favorite co-author ever. Thank you for inviting me, Michael.
Yay, it's really my pleasure. So excited to celebrate the launch of the second edition of the book. I am Michael Baran, CEO of Iris Inclusion is the name of my diversity, equity, and inclusion firm. I'm in Maryland, for those of you who don't know, and my background is really as a social scientist. I kind of got passionate about issues related to diversity, equity, and inclusion a long, long time ago, before you even called it that. And had this passion about it because of the injustice and also this intellectual curiosity about it. Like, wait a minute, you're telling me we all have unconscious biases in our heads and we don't even know they're there and we wouldn't even want them to be there? Well, how does that happen? Like, how does it happen that cultures can make some people feel really great and valued and other people not so much? But it often happens in these really subtle ways. And so really got my doctorate in cultural anthropology and cognitive psychology to try to understand the part of it that's cultures and the part of it that's just human brains and how they work and how those things go together. And as you can see, what we did in this book is like use all that to help people really understand something so important. And well, why don't you talk about why did we write this book? Like, what drove us to write it in the first place?
So you and I had both been in the DEI industry for some time when we met each other at the conference where we also met Murray. And that was the Forum on Workplace Inclusion. And the conversation at that point, I think that the conversation about unconscious bias had really taken hold. And that was I always considered that to be an easy on-ramp into the diversity conversation, because if you can let people off the hook, they just feel a little bit more ready and willing to accept other conversations. The conversation about microaggressions was the one where you and I got together and we were just like, it's a troubling term, it's a troubling concept, and just like being called a racist, the approach to the conversation about you just did a microaggression at me doesn't really ever land well, because it's always so accusatory. And so we looked at identifying a new way to, like, we want to be the marketing and PR agency for microaggressions, rebrand and reframe this concept in a way that allows for more grace on all sides. So it's not just about the person who's being harmed, which, we want to center that person and those people, but it's also about the hapless individuals who are just bumbling through their lives, causing harm and not actually meaning to. Those folks who are out here hurting people on purpose, that's a whole nother webinar.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
most of us are tripping into these spaces, and there's not a lot of grace, especially in these times, for folks who aren't getting it right and who are, using their words as weapons without realizing it. So we wanted to soften that conversation, make it more approachable, but use a deeply intellectual approach that breaks it down and makes it both accessible and actionable.
Yeah, I love what you just said. One person who read it described it to me as gentle but firm. And I think that's really important. The gentle by itself would certainly not be enough, because these microaggressions or subtle acts of exclusion or SAEs, they're causing real serious harm to people, right?
Oh, we lost you, Michael.
Workplaces, in schools, in community. So what I was saying is the book has been described as gentle but firm, which is really important because of the real harm that subtle acts of exclusion are causing to people in workplaces, in schools, in communities all over the place. And like Doc said, there's explicit harm being done. We usually recognize that pretty easily when we see it. And the subtle stuff is what flies under the radar and keeps happening and keeps causing harm. I mean, the research showing that subtle exclusions cause people to have mental and physical health problems. That's how serious of an issue it is. And yet it often gets ignored or it gets washed away as people are just being too sensitive. You can't say anything these days. And that's so not what's going on here. That's really what sparked this collaboration, which I think is seeing some really exciting impacts.
And I just want to say, like, I represent 5 intersectional identities. I'm that token minority everyone's looking for, because you get to check multiple boxes. And the nature and frequency of SAEs that I see, witness, and experience, and the ones that I hear about through all of the adjacent communities that I'm a member of, are so incredibly alarming. Because I mean, that's, again, subtle but not insignificant acts of exclusion. People are going to their therapist and spending thousands and thousands of dollars trying to unwind the damage that is happening in regular day-to-day conversations everywhere. But the workplace is one of the places where I'm most concerned, because, you know, navigating your personal relationships and who you decide to be friends and lovers with, that's your business. But if you're going to work, there is a duty of care that our employers have to keep us safe. And if you have to take body shots, verbal body shots, at the place of employment where you are just trying to make a living and care for yourself and your people, that is a harm that can't be acceptable. It just cannot be accepted.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, as you can tell, if you're just joining and trickling in, this is just a conversation we're having to celebrate the 2nd edition of the book. Also a chance for us to answer any questions that you might have. So please feel free at points to either unmute and ask questions or type them into the chat. And if you want to ask a question but you want to be anonymous about it, you can send it directly to Doc or to me, and we'll read the question but not the name of the person who asked it. So feel free to do that as we chat. But yeah, you know, the other part of it that you mentioned, Doc, is framing. And I don't think people recognize how important framing is. So you come into a training that's on microaggressions, and you don't realize that you've already been implicitly communicated with about what is this and what's going on here. And, you know, are we focusing attention on aggression as if that's the intention? Are we subtly communicating that it's not very important because we called it micro, right? And that's what led to us going for a very much more like, let's just call it what it is approach. And as you very well know, we had a long list of potential reframes. That was probably one of the more fun parts of writing the book, is if we're going to reframe this thing, what are we going to call it? And some were trying to be clever, and some were trying to be jargony, and some were trying to be, you know, sticky. And in the end, just saying, well, let's just call it what it is, right? Subtle doesn't mean it feels subtle, but the subtlety is what makes it so it keeps happening. Just an act, not necessarily about intention, just a thing you said or did. And what's the impact, right? The opposite of inclusion.
So Michael, do you want to frame up the taxonomy, the framework real quick for just can you do, it's a challenge. Can you do in 2 minutes or less a frame up of how we define the subtle acts of exclusion? For anyone who hasn't read it, I'm sure you all have read the 1st edition. I'll remind you, this is what it looked like. But in case you didn't read it, go 2 minutes or less.
Yeah, 2 minutes or less. Here we go. So, subtle acts of exclusion, right? Things that people say or do without intending necessarily to do harm. And again, sometimes people mean you harm. That's a different conversation, right? So things that people say or do when they're maybe trying to give you a compliment, they're maybe trying to bond with you, to ask you a question, to be curious about you. That might be the intention. And yet the impact, the way that it lands for other people, may be the exact opposite of that. So to give you a really common example, because somebody is direct messaging me some typical examples, right? Let me give you a few examples to talk it through. Probably the most common, the most written about example is calling a Black person articulate or well-spoken. Right? There are hundreds of articles written about this when Obama was a candidate. So somebody thinks to themselves, gosh, I really value public speaking, and this person was a great public speaker. And what they say is, whoa, you're so articulate. Wow, you're so well spoken, right? Now, there may be intending to give a compliment, but the way that it lands, what it makes that other person feel is something maybe more like, hey, I didn't expect you to be so articulate or so well spoken. Maybe what you feel is you're inadequate because I didn't expect that of someone who looks like you or sounds like you. And so that's an example of a subtle act of exclusion. Another one that happens all the time. Asking an Asian American, especially, oh, where are you from? And somebody says, New Jersey. And then you say, oh, where are you from before that? Or where are you really from? Or where are your parents from? Right? Whereas when somebody white, you asked, where are you from? And they said, New Jersey. You said, oh, cool. What part? Right? And so again, it might be someone who just thinks to themselves, I'm just curious about everyone I meet. I love knowing about people. And that may be true, but there might be a bias somewhere in your head that makes it come out for some people as feeling like you don't belong, or you're not normal, or you're inadequate. So let me give you just a few more examples so you really get the sense of what subtle acts of exclusion can be, because they can happen along any dimension of difference. Race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, ability or disability, religion, age, any dimension of difference you can think about, right? So I'll give you an example. And these are all stories that people told us in our work or in writing the book. A man who's blind is walking down the hallway at work, and people silently flatten themselves up against the wall to get out of his way, right? As he says to me in this story, look, I know people aren't trying to hurt me. In fact, I know they're trying to help me. They are awkwardly contorting themselves up against the wall to get out of my way. I get it. You're trying to help. But what it makes me feel is you're not normal, right? You're invisible and you're a burden. And if you had just said hi, that would help me get down the hall better. And I'd feel like a normal person, and maybe I got to ask you something about work, and I would know who it is that's passing me, right? Or somebody who told us that she often hears people saying things like, oh, you're not like those other millennials. You're one of the good millennials, right? Again, trying to be a compliment, and yet it's landing as feeling like you're inadequate and your whole generation is inadequate. So what we did is when we wrote the book, we looked at all the examples we could find. I mean, from the literature, from our work, from interviews that we did, and we found the most common impacts that these are having on people. So something might be said, but what it makes people feel is you're inadequate, you're a threat, you're invisible, you're not normal, you're a burden, you're a curiosity, things like that. And what that helps us do is understand why this is not about people being too sensitive, but it's about we say things that make people feel that exclusion, and we don't even realize it. And we can A, understand it better, B, have better conversations about it when it happens, because it's gonna keep happening, right? Doc, are we gonna stop doing subtle acts of exclusion anytime soon?
No, I do them every single day. So my 16-year-old cancels me on the daily because I can't keep up with the new terminology and all the things I'm not supposed to say. So if the authors are going to keep doing it, we're all going to keep doing it.
Yeah, exactly. And there's something freeing about that, right?
I think so. It changes the way
Like,
you think.
oh, did you freeze or did I freeze?
I think you froze. You've been freezing. I don't know. But you didn't freeze through your over 2 minutes. But it was
Okay.
so good, I didn't want to stop you. That was very, very good stuff.
2 minutes would have been a record.
I mean, I just had to try, I thought the game would be fun. Yeah, I'm curious if anybody has any questions or thoughts now or
I
directions
I
that they'd like
have
to go. Are you getting some?
I just have some direct ones I'll
Nice. Go
read.
for it. Right.
So there's a question about why have transgender issues become so prevalent, and why is there so much vitriol? Like, why is that such a hot button topic?
Oh, I would love to answer this as a member of the transgender community.
All
Um,
right.
so I'm non-binary. Non-binary, I use they, them pronouns, and non-binary is an umbrella that falls underneath transgender because transgender just means that you do not identify with your gender assigned at birth. Okay. Um, so it has become prevalent because transgender people, we've always been here. We've always been around. There's always been that auntie or that uncle who's, who broke the gender norms, and however people were comfortable or uncomfortable around that from time immemorial, at every point in history. And my anthropologist co-author can confirm that we have always been here, just like LGBTQIA plus people have been here since the dawn of time. What has happened is that our awareness as a community and our comfort level with ourselves has increased so much that we're not interested in hiding in the shadows in any capacity anymore. We are demanding that we be allowed to exist, just to live, to take up space, and to have jobs, and be gainfully employed, and be taken seriously, and be minded and considered to be the professionals that we are, and the people that we, and occupy the space that we have earned in society. It has become a really big deal because the United States, while we are sorely deficient in our actualized integration, because we're more segregated now than we were at the height of legalized segregation, we're terrible at our actual integration. But the laws that we've had, although they're beginning to become eroded, but the laws that we've had have been really progressive in terms of protecting and making space for people. And so as transgender people become more visible and become more vocal about the spaces that we occupy, it falls under gender protections. And so it is not only an act of coming out of the closet and an act of taking up space, but it is our legal right to do our jobs and be treated equitably, regardless of our gender presentation, our gender identity, etc. So it is a reclamation of rights that should have always been ours. It's just that the momentum is coming, I think, from younger generations that really don't give a flying, rat about anybody's expectations for who they should be and how they should show up. So you've got younger people coming in and just showing up as who they are, and the establishment is saying, holy guacamole, how are we going to respond to this? What do we do? And everyone's shaking in their boots.
Yeah.
Lisa.
Yeah.
Oh, got her.
Yep.
Lisa, you had your hand up. Hi.
Hi, Michael. How are
Hi.
you?
Good.
I attend as many trainings like this as I can. I am 56 years old. I'm an adult with ADHD. And one of the examples Michael just mentioned about, thanking somebody for the way they presented. I have to really work on that, because in my head, what I'm saying is, thank you for keeping my attention, because your presentation was so clear that my ADHD didn't just totally turn you off and me start writing a grocery list. Not recognizing that, I mean, in my case, I don't care what platform you're on, whether it be Teams, whatever, LGBTQ, Black, white, whatever. Thank you for keeping my attention. Mm-hmm. And I haven't found a way to actually say that without appearing that it might be a subtle act of exclusion, or having to apologize in advance saying this isn't one. I'm the problem. I have ADHD and have about 15-minute attention span. So any thoughts on that? Or maybe that's your next book, how to work with people, right?
Yeah, I mean, quick thoughts are on my end, and then Doc, you can chime in too. But quick thoughts on my end are, simple compliments sometimes, like great talk, really engaging, without needing to go into all that, can keep it maybe more understood and more well received. That's one thought that came to mind. And the second is, well, the more we learn, the more we know what may impact people negatively, but we can never be sure. Understanding that we might say exactly the same thing to two different people, and for one person it feels like a subtle act of exclusion, and for another person it doesn't at all. And that doesn't invalidate the fact that it did feel bad to that one person, right? And so we can there's no guarantees. There's no simple list of like, memorize these 25 things and you're always good. Memorize these 20 things to not say, right? And then you're fine. It's leaning into understanding that our words and actions impact people in different ways, and then kind of embracing that and taking the feedback well if we get it. And obviously we talk a lot about that in the book, how to take that feedback well. When people tell you, hey, I know you didn't mean anything bad by this, but it made me feel like this when you said that. How do you respond in a way that builds more connection? And that even though you said something that made someone feel bad, you can actually get closer because of it, rather than feeling further apart and having more resentment and more distance. Anything you would add?
Yeah, that's it. It's a fine balance. What I find about this book and the what I get as the most common feedback is that it's one of those things that once you see it, you can't unsee it. So if you take it to heart and you're actually going through the exercises and really taking it in, then you'll start to see subtle acts of exclusion everywhere. You'll hear and feel and see yourself doing it. And I think almost like, I know I cannot keep up with the ticky-tacky generation. These young people are too fast for me. Their technology is too fast. The language is evolving too fast. I can't keep up. And I'm not expecting myself to keep up and know everything. So in my estimation, I think like, yes, a general awareness, like every once in a while, read that article that is outside of your reach and has nothing to do with your generation. Do what you can. But the biggest investment is in how I respond in those moments, because your response in those moments, like you can cause more harm with your defensive response sometimes than the initial thing, because I might have let you off the hook and said, okay, well, awkward, but, and then if I say something and you get really, hot under the collar and bent out of shape about it, then it's like, now I feel worse, you feel worse, and we're broken. So learning how to mitigate your own response is so powerful, because if you come from a genuine place and you're heartfelt and you open your heart and you say, I'm really sorry. I am trying to do better. And thank you so much for educating me about that, and keep it moving, girl. You'll be fine. That was probably a SAE. We don't call grown women girls. So my bad. First SAE of the webinar.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, you recognize them everywhere when you start to think about it. I was doing a workshop with people the other day, 20 people who were so into DE&I, and they wanted to be champions. It was a champions workshop. And we went around introducing ourselves, 20 people. And I think in those 20 introductions, I heard at least 5 things that I think were SAEs. Like, and these are people trying so hard to do their best. People who have read the books and thought the things and watched the documentaries. So it's taking a breath. Like you said, we're all going to do it. It's how you respond. I did see in the chat a comment from Rebecca from FCPS. Yay, FCPS. And asking about what are the differences between the first and the second edition. You want to take a stab at that?
So, I mean, the big news, one, we won 2 awards for the last one that we're very proud of. We had to fight to get those little emblems down there. But it is a substantially larger book. There are 3 new chapters in the book. And so the first thing, the first thing that's not even included in the chapter, it's just woven throughout, is this book came out in March of 2020. Right as the pandemic was kicking off. Our entire world and our entire perspective on everything shifted after that. So we had to recontextualize much of the book for that. As with most, subsequent editions of books, we made corrections throughout. Like, I'm a member of the transgender community, and I was talking about biological sex in the first edition. And that is an SAE for people in my community now. So we corrected things where language was updated. And then the biggest ones are, we added we added case studies and examples of how people have used it in the time since the first one came out until the publication of the second one. So you get to see the practical application, a study guide and conversation guide. So instead of leaving you to your own devices to try to figure out how to turn this into, a course, a book club, a conversation, we've made that much easier for you. And then I think we expanded the intentional acts of inclusion, which was the closing section. We expanded that into a full chapter because people were very, very hungry for more on that front. How can we intentionally kind of cut these things off and create a more inclusive environment?
Yeah, absolutely. And Rebecca, if that discussion activity guide would be helpful for FCPS, just let me know, and I'm really happy to send that over to y'all.
I'm letting you know. Thank you. We appreciate it. And there's a couple of us on here in the call, so thank you for holding this for us. We really appreciate it.
I so appreciate the work that y'all are doing. As you know, I have 4 kids that have gone through or are going through the FCPS system. So I appreciate y'all leaning into this topic so much.
Thank you.
I do want to share another example of, of the SAEs that we are not aware of oftentimes, and it's also around disability, and that is the notion of leaning on, holding on to, and talking to people in front of someone who sits in a power chair. So any kind of device that helps people with their mobility, a wheelchair, a power chair, whatever the case may be, that is not a place to sit your glass, to rest your elbow. And we have to be mindful and inclusive of folks who use wheelchairs, because that is an extension of their body, their personal space. So the way that we, it's like the opposite of the going up against the wall for the person who is unable to see. You are making a person who uses a wheelchair feel invisible by using them as a prop or a side table. So definitely an SAE and something to look out for.
Yeah, absolutely. And make me think about another way that SAEs often happen, which is people trying so hard to make other people feel comfortable. So somebody in a wheelchair told me, Michael, do you know how many times a day somebody tries to make me feel comfortable by telling a joke like, oh, don't go get in a speeding ticket with that thing, right? Where he says, look, I know you're trying to make me feel comfortable with my wheelchair, but what it actually makes me feel is that's all you see is my wheelchair. And that's sort of a one-off throwaway comment for you. I've heard that 5 times today. Like, it is not making me feel good in the way you think it might be. So that's another reason. There's a question that I've got here, Doc, I would love to hear your thoughts on. How do you get people who think DE&I has no place in work to really change their minds about that, their attitudes, their behaviors?
I mean, if DEI has no place in work, then human beings have no place in work.
There you go.
DEI is not a function of, characteristic, or descriptor for just a handful of special people who need some kind of special handling. We are all DEI. We are all part of that. There is no exception outside of. We need to think of our organizational cultures, and that's what I study. I have a Doctor of Management in Organizational Leadership. So for me, the health of the organizational culture is primary. And if we are privileging our output, our productivity, and our profit over the well-being of what I consider to be sacred human beings, I don't know of anybody who is disposable, unimportant, or able to be not considered. And DEI is about creating space for all of us to feel welcome, to feel like we belong. And anybody who has a problem, that's why I do love the addition of belonging into the acronym, because who doesn't want to belong? And if you're not down with belonging and helping other people around you feel like they belong, then we need to have a conversation, right? That's a values misalignment. So it is not about creating, it's not just about creating special circumstances and concessions, because we do need to make accommodations. We do need to, over-index for areas where we have left folks behind. Absolutely. But also, my favorite example is, the cishet white guy. The cishet white guy needs to understand the power and privilege of his role within the context of that organization. So many cishet white guys have sponsored me over the course of my career, who have helped bring me along in ways and provided me with access that I would never have gotten had it not been for a cishet white guy who was like, in you, like, let me help out here. So that's only one of a million ways, but everyone needs to understand their context. And DEI is for all of us. So making the case that when all of us are well, right, then that's what we're looking for. Because when any of us are unwell, the entire symbiotic system suffers.
Yeah. And I mean, how lucky are we that the thing that actually works to make people feel better, to feel valued, is the thing that also helps us do our work together. That's amazing that that aligns. Like, whether your goal is to make more money, to educate children better, to fulfill your mission better, whatever you're looking to do in your organization, DEI helps you do that better. And that's pretty amazing that that aligns with what actually feels good to people.
I do have another one here, the one that I answered publicly, haha, because who knows how to use Zoom. Somebody asked, what do you say if you get pushback when someone says a racist comment? Should it not be referred to as SAE or microaggression? And so my response was, all right, so there's overt acts of racism and all of the isms versus the SAE. But, generally speaking, if somebody is just being hateful, if it's in the workplace, then there's recourse, right? With we have policies and procedures that protect people from hate speech, etc. Hopefully we can use that. If we're talking about out in the wider world, generally my thing is, I don't know, I'm invested in this relationship with you. I'm not going to spend my sacred energy trying to rehabilitate you when I've got other fish to fry. So in this manner, it is worth choosing your battles. Now, if you are a person of privilege in certain areas and you feel like if you say nothing, then if you don't say anything, then nobody will, and you feel like you really need to step in and do that, that's why I gave the response that I did, which is, it doesn't hurt to soften the blow by saying, hey, you may not be aware of this, but that term is really offensive to people. You treat it like an SAE so that you can give them a soft approach and you can create an opening for a greater dialogue that might move them just a couple of paces forward in their cultural fluency.
Yeah, that's so great. You're making me think too of a concept that's really important in the book, which is the concept of allyship. So usually SAEs happen when there is more than one person or more than two people around. So you've got a person who said or did the thing, you've got the person or group that thing is directed towards, and there's usually other people around who overheard it, who saw it happen, who we would call potential allies. And what's so important about that is the folks who have experienced the most subtle acts of exclusion, the most marginalization from unfairness and from unfair systems, have the most risk for actually saying something about it, and maybe the most frustration, the most anger, the most I'm sick of this. And so what we need is, what we are not saying for sure is, here's another burden for you folks. Now you've got to go educate people on this. That is not what we are saying. That's why we emphasize the role of a potential ally who doesn't have the same risk and who might be able to say something in a way that is helpful, that doesn't place an extra burden on the person who has experienced that subtle act of exclusion. And by the way, that person or group might not even be in the same room. I've certainly been in a lot of rooms with only men, and subtle acts of exclusion against women are happening all over the place. But it's still, and maybe even more important, to say something then, even when there's no one around from that group who's going to be quote unquote offended by it.
I do want to point out that someone said, after we gave the example about the power chair, service dogs as well, right? I actually have a psychiatric service dog. He is a 4.8-pound Yorkie. So he is literally the most cutest little delectable thing ever. And trying to keep people's hands off of my dog is a daily challenge.
Right. There's a question about allyship, which is, how do you know when to say something as someone who wants to practice allyship? How do you know when to jump in and when to not?
That's a good one.
Is a good one.
That was a good one. I mean, that is really, yeah, especially if you are, we talk about the white savior complex, right? So if you're a white person who's jumping in on behalf of, I had an example of this happen to me a couple months ago. I was at Whole Foods and I had my cart. I was looking for a lane and I sent my daughter to go walk up and get in the lane ahead of me. I grabbed something and I came. Somebody saw my daughter get in line but didn't see me coming after her and just thought that I don't know, but it was a white man and he was just livid, got all in my face and inappropriate. And I just looked at him and I was like, you probably, you need to check yourself. Like, this is not okay. And a diminutive, it looks like a femme presenting person, very tiny, kind of bent around through the lanes and was like, "Are you okay?" Like got in my eyes and just was like, "Do you need backup? Because I watched this and this doesn't look okay." And I was like, "I'm all right." Right. And then after I went through the line, had a conversation with her, let her know what happened. But it was really cool. Like in that moment, I was in front of my child. My child has not experienced very many acts of racism, and she's a fight or flight. She's a freezer, so she was very uncomfortable. I make her uncomfortable anyway because I talk to everyone, and I'm so blue-haired and outgoing. So she's like, "Oh my God, my mom's probably going to kill this person." I'm like, "No," but she's like, "Well, you should have just ignored it." I'm like, "Absolutely not." This man felt like, I said, if I had a blonde ponytail and you did too, he would have said, "I hope you're having a nice day," or something else. But he felt like because of my brown body, and again, internalized oppression, who knows, attributional ambiguity, who knows, he may have just been having a bad day. But having an older white man get up in my face and talk about how what I did was somehow morally wrong, when literally I just got into a checkout outline and he was not there before me, my child was there before him, silly, absolutely silly. But your gut, this is when your intuition, we talked, there's a lot of folks on this call, your intuition, your voice, right? If it feels gnarly to you, if it feels like something has gone sideways, that is what I consider to be a call from the universe for you to probably take notes, say something, do something. In that moment, that young woman felt the gnarly energy and she chose to check in with me and be like, "Do you need me as an employee of this organization to step in here and get this man to back off of you?" So I like the checking in with the person who is the subject of the SAE, if that's possible. And a maybe not a big overt out loud stepping in that is too dramatic, make it subtle, make the person and the people in the room and the environment maybe aware of the fact that you clocked the SAE without saving, right? Just be like, "Wow, that was an interesting choice of words," right?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's such a range of ways to step in as a potential ally, right? There's no one right answer on how to do it. Sometimes, like, let's say you're in a meeting and women are getting cut off, which research shows women get cut off all the time in meetings, right? Like, one way to do it might be to pause and try to have a whole conversation about it. Another way might just be to say, "Oh, I don't think Sarah was done yet. Can we finish hearing what you were saying?" Right? And not having a whole conversation about it. There's just such a wide range on how you do it. And you don't always know. It's not always easy. But the more you do it, the more you start to get a real feel for it. And one of the things that has happened over the last I don't know, forever, is people haven't stepped up and said something about it because it's really hard. It's super uncomfortable. It kind of takes something, it puts yourself out there where you might be worried that you're going to say something wrong in the process of trying to step up and stand with somebody else. And so it's hard, and people haven't done it. They have erred on the side of not saying anything. And so what we're trying to do is shift that a little and get people to err on the side of saying something, even if occasionally maybe it wasn't wanted, maybe you shouldn't have, but we'll be in a much better place if people in general are trying. That if the more like you said, you'll see them everywhere. I was in Costco yesterday, and I was pulling up to the end, you know, to leave where they check your receipts, and I saw a strange thing happening with a woman who was leaving in her cart, who seemed like a white woman, and then somebody looking at her receipt who seemed like a black woman. I couldn't hear anything about it though. She left. I go out. I didn't know what it was about. I didn't say anything in that moment, just gave an extra big smile. Then I walk outside and I see that other woman say something, directed at an Asian American woman. And I was like, oh, there's something here going on that's not right. So when she walked by me, I said, hey, what did she just say? Are you okay? And she was like, yeah, she said, who are you on the phone with? Biden? And then walked away. And I was like, she's like, I don't even know what that is. I'm fine though. And, but it happens all the time.
So Daniel, did you have a question? You raised your hand and then you ran away. Was that a sneeze or a yawn?
I'm here. I'm just thinking that, you know, just when as you're both talking, there's just so many things that are coming up. You know, one is this. I think that one thing that people don't tend to talk about a lot is is eye contact.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're, for example, at a restaurant, and there's somebody at the table who's not talking, that person probably doesn't get a lot of eye contact. The same thing in a meeting. For example, I had a manager who didn't realize that he claimed that he respected women, but when you look at who he looks at in the room, his eyes were going from man to man to man to man, and when a woman would speak up, his eyes would go to his phone.
Oh my
So, you know, do you make them? You know, in my experience, there's two ways people react when you point things out. Even if you say, I know that your intent was positive, but one is that they could just get totally negative. They just get totally defensive, almost in a fight or flight mode. Yeah. The other one is sort of like this overreaction to, oh my God, did I really do that? I can't believe I did that. So just your thoughts on eye contact.
No, that's really powerful. I mean, for it to be to the level where an outside observer could clock that means that it's a real thing. And to me, that's and I you know, one of the questions that was asked earlier, I talked about, you know, a coaching opportunity, right? That's a coaching opportunity. That's a leadership skill. You cannot persist with behaviors that make people feel like they are invisible, unimportant, not as valuable, etc. So that would be absolutely something that you point out. And again, how you deliver the message is everything. That can be delivered with grace. Hey, you probably aren't aware of this. Most of us as leaders, one of the hardest journeys that we have is the journey of seeing ourselves the way that other people see us, experiencing ourselves the way that other people experience us. And so letting that person know, I'm pretty certain that you're not doing this on purpose, because, you know, the implications of that would be pretty wild. So I want to raise this to your awareness. I know that this might be hard to hear, but this is something that I've noticed. And if I've noticed it, I'm sure that other people have noticed it too. And so this is something that you might want to work on. And then to the extent that you have seniority and can help, you know, get that person the support that they need. And yes, I'm glad you're aware that they are likely to freak out, because they are.
Yeah, I mean, and there's a lot of nonverbal subtle acts of exclusion like that, right? That can happen too. And so being aware of that is not always things that are said. It's like, it could be, you know, a guy who mentions a past boyfriend and there's just like a pause, even though someone says, oh, cool, you know, but the pause might make someone feel not normal or like they don't belong. I was just reading some research about, you got your phone in your hand and you're talking to somebody. You're not even looking at it, but just the fact that it's in your hand makes that person feel less valued. Like your attention at any moment could be taken away. So like simple acts of putting your phone in your pocket when you're talking to somebody, and who are you doing that with and who are you not doing that with, related to what you're saying. And then, you know, like you said, you nailed it. Like neither of those reactions are good, the defensive one or the over apology. What does the over apology do? Now I've got to take care of you, right? Instead of you taking care of me. So neither of those are really helpful.
We have a really great question here, or you know, reference here from Laura in the chat. She asks that we speak to colloquialisms because she struggles with folks' use of pull the trigger in reference to starting projects. Her personal experience with death by suicide, this phrase hurts and can slam her right into grief and trauma. So the English language is so incredibly full of violence. So I'm on a quest to extract the violence from my language, and also to decolonize my mind. And these are very, very rough things to do. I have found that raising people's awareness of, like, you don't have to share your actual trauma. Thank you, Laura, for putting that on the table and like helping us viscerally understand how and why that might be harmful language, because some people don't understand why that would hurt at all. But I, without even having that experience, I don't like violence in language because I'm an empath, and I feel when the references, when you talk about bullet points on a presentation, why are they bullets? Can they be buttons? Can they be dots? Can they be points? Can they be anything else? So I think that now that I've said that to you, for those of you that haven't been thinking along those lines, you'll start to see it in virtually every meeting and every conversation. There is some reference to violence. I do not think it's a coincidence that we have so much violence in our language, so much violence in our entertainment, and that we have so much violence happening between human beings within our borders. So the quest to extract that language is one that you just have to take on personally and educate people.
Yeah. And
say it.
Yeah, and there's so many colloquialisms too, based in like racism, based in gendered language. There's so many, and they're like, they're not, people don't mean it. It doesn't even come to mind for them most of the time. There's an example, like rule of thumb, which has this, according to many, has a really bad history behind it, but people say it all the time. Other folks say, no, it's not really that bad. But it doesn't really matter. Like, if it makes people feel bad, then it's just, why not cut it out of your language? There's so many different ways to say things, and so you get in a habit. It also brings up a really important point for me, which is it's not always easy to change the way that you talk, right? Like, I grew up in a small town in Connecticut. I think a lot of people in the Northeast you say you guys all the time when we're talking about a group of people who could be any gender. It's a gendered way of talking that makes some people feel not included. And so I've just been working on trying to cut that out of my language, but it's not easy. Like, if you have these habits, it takes a little work. But once you do the work, it actually does rewire your brain, and you just stop saying it as much. Not that you won't ever slip up, but you just stop saying it as much. Same with like pronouns. A lot of people say, I get so messed up trying to use they, them pronouns to talk about a single person. And it's like, yeah, if your brain isn't used to doing that, then it might take some practice. It might take a minute. You might mess it up sometimes, but if you stick with it, it's gonna be fine. Like, it's just like anything. If you decide one day, I've never done a push-up, but I'm gonna do 200 right now, you're not. Like, you're not. But if you start working at it, you will, and it will be fine. So you just have to stick with it. And when you say the things that then make people feel good and make people feel inclusion, it's going to reinforce that. It's not always going to feel bad or awkward. It's going to also feel good.
A lot of great examples coming up in the chat of language that is exclusionary, colloquialisms. Yeah. It is rampant in our language, and I actually find it to be a bit of a fun exercise. I'm really grateful to Holly, who added the neurodiverse one. I'm neurodiverse myself, and extracting that language is I'm finding that pretty hard, because we have just normalized the use of mental health language in a derogatory way, in a silly way, and that's not okay. So that's one that, I struggle with a lot of these. I think that's part of why I wrote the book, because they are so hard. But again, there is no destination. There's no magical date at which you will be finished with this. It is just a commitment to do less harm to people. And when you recognize that your words can be harmful, just keep trying. Just keep trying. And I catch myself with you guys. I catch myself with the neurodiverse language. It's very, very tough, but it's worth it. And honestly, I believe that when you make the effort, the people who in the room who might be offended or offended on behalf of people who aren't in the room appreciate it when you say, dang it, that was violent language. My apologies. Choose a new word in the moment. Expose yourself as a human. And if you happen to have any kind of leadership capacity whatsoever, that is one of the most endearing things that you can do. Let the people that you supervise and lead see that you are fallible. Oh my goodness. Wow. I need to choose a new word there and say why. You know, I just said that this project is making me crazy, and that is exclusionary language that offends neurodiverse people. My apologies. This this project is really complex, and it is causing me to to endure a lot of stress.
Yeah.
Just change it in the moment and own it, and people will give you a lot more grace in the future for different kinds of mistakes, is what I find, right? Because they're like, oh, this is a person, this is not a robot.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. You know, you mentioned leaders, and there's so many examples where a leader is in a meeting, and some SAE happens, and a leader's impulse oftentimes is to not say anything in that moment, but to go up to people individually after the meeting happens. Like, oh, you know, I want to check in with you. Are you okay? How did that make you feel? Or the person who said it, like, hey, that wasn't a great thing to say. We need to talk about this. You need to cut that out. Those aren't necessarily terrible impulses, but what leaders often fail to think about in that case is, what about everyone else in that meeting? Everyone else who may have noticed it, may have now be questioning your commitment to being an inclusive leader and creating inclusion on that team, that may be thinking, well, that didn't feel good to me, might even be thinking, I don't feel psychologically safe in this space if this person isn't going to watch out for stuff like that, right? And so psychological safety, as you know, is a topic that dovetails with this one very nicely, because you need to feel safe in order to be who you are, to bring your best ideas, to fail in productive ways, which really matters for us, for an organization being innovative, for really performing up to the highest potential that they can. And so really establishing that culture of inclusion, you got to talk about the subtle things as well as the obvious blatant things.
So Lashia, I hope I'm saying your name right, had her hand up, and I don't see her anymore.
I'm still here. I'm still here.
You still have a question?
Well, I actually had kind of a comment as well, and Michael just really kind of touched on it, that safety factor of it. SAE that I really think about that hits home to me and my families, we're a part of a foster and adoptive community here in Frederick County. And particularly, we are an intercultural family. And one thing that makes it very, very difficult is just once people see a family that looks a little bit different, whether it's school settings or even just going out to dinner, there is this need for others to feel like they have to touch or just across boundaries for that child, or the sympathetic look for them. And it's very triggering for even our older children who are realizing these strangers are now touching me, and that's not an okay thing. So we have all of these different aspects that are kind of encompassing into what we do. We have the Handle with Care and Handle with Kindness and all of these different programs, but we still find that there's a lot of education that needs to go about that, whether it's educators or just our public in general, because we're crossing boundaries with these children whenever they're coming into spaces, and they just want to have dinner just like anybody else, and not have the sympathetic looks kind of given to them, or to ask them if they're okay, or to change, fix their hair or whatever it may be. Just they need to have a safe space, and that includes everywhere that they go.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, absolutely. And good to see you again too. What else? What other questions are coming through? I did get a question on why is this so important in schools, not just corporate settings?
Well, I'm finding that particularly in the university environments, right? I'm finding a lot of university professors and instructors are engaging with this book as a means of preparing the students for the real work life. Every cohort that goes in is entering a workforce that is more diverse than the previous one. As the nation diversifies, so does every single workplace. And so young folks, and it's not just, see, there's an SAE. It's more than just young folks that go to college. People who matriculate through the university system have to, need to be as prepared as possible for what they're going to face in the workforce. There are a lot of people who come from homogeneous environments, who go to homogeneous schools, and then find themselves for the first time in their lives in diverse environments, and they can wreak some of the worst havoc. So preparing folks in advance is why. And not only that, but I mean, within the time that they're still in university, the more inclusive their behaviors, the better that is for the entire university community. And quite honestly, this education needs to start in elementary school.
Yeah, and it's so important for younger kids too. I mean, elementary, middle, high school. It's one of the biggest factors in a child's learning outcomes is, do they feel, one, engaged with the material, and everybody knows that, but do they feel inclusion? Do they feel part of a network of care? And that impacts their actual learning outcomes to a huge degree. And SAEs are happening all over the place in classrooms, from kids to kids, from teacher to kids, from teacher to teacher, teacher to staff, all over the place across the board.
As long as we're human, we're not exempt from this behavior. And it is, again, I find it to be a lot like hygiene. I wish I could take one shower and be done for life. We've got to,
where I noticed the time here, so I know people are going to have to start dropping off. Doc, I wonder if you could, when we started this call, before people were logging in, we were talking about the current moment in the world and in workplaces. I wonder if I can give you a 2-minute challenge. Like, how does this book fit with the current moment in the world, in the country and beyond, just where people are these days?
Yeah, so I mean, I do think that it is a helpful tool in the context of a world that is increasingly polarized. The decisions that we're seeing come down from SCOTUS are having some pretty serious adverse effects within the DEI industry, for sure, and across all industries that are, all industries and organizations that are committed to this work. We're finding that people are relaxing their grip on their commitments to the work. They're scared of what's coming because we've got things like public institutions being sued for diversity practices. And so, like, one thing I would say on that front, like, all of my clients, and I'm sure that Michael's clients as well, know that they are safe from any such, I mean, the adverse action might take place, but you will prevail as long as you can tie your programs, policies, and procedures to outcomes within your institution. If you can show that your employees are happier and healthier, if you can show that your productivity, your output, whatever it is that you do in your business, that business is done better as a result of, which is harder to show, but alongside. So you should be measuring as much as you can so that you can say, we're measuring this, and also look how healthy the business is. Have clear definitions for those things, but it is a difficult moment. And Subtle Acts of Exclusion, second edition, is a really helpful tool to help us navigate some of the most challenging conversations that we're ever going to have. We are on the precipice of revolution, if not well deep into the throes of said revolution. So the more culturally competent and culturally fluent we can be, the more we can navigate this with grace. As stark as the differences can be, the better off we will all be for it.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And just another tool for bringing people together around these hard topics, for instead of the polarization that you mentioned, going back to that, like, gentle but firm approach, where there's some stuff we need to talk about. And a lot of times people have this fatigue, like, haven't we talked enough about this? And we would say, not even close, if we're thinking about inclusion and equity and all of the work that we still need to do. So the more tools we can have to really enable those conversations in ways that bring us closer together, that build more trust, that allow more cooperation, I think that's really important. And so that's why I'm excited for the timing of this, and for the the impacts we know that can happen from our work with organizations over the last 3 years. So thank you all for coming. So nice to be able to talk with you, Doc, and to be able to share this with all of you. If you had questions that we didn't get a chance to answer, please definitely feel free to reach out.
And review the book. And for everybody who's here, definitely review the book, even if you have the first edition. If you go to the new edition when you order it, but you don't have to order it, they'll let you review it anyway. Give us some stars, give us some reviews. At its heart, it is still the same book, but that helps increase the visibility of the book so that we can create more warriors out here, warriors of grace, who are treating each other with kindness and love.
Beautiful. I love it. All right. Thanks all. Great to see you. Bye, everyone.